She cornered me and whispered, "Why should she have you all to herself?" And everything I thought I knew about love changed. The day started quietly, the kind of morning that felt like it could stretch forever. I was 26, still figuring out life, love, and how to navigate the subtle expectations of people older and wiser than me. My girlfriend, Sarah, was 42. Confident, graceful, and impossibly magnetic without ever trying. Her presence filled a room, not with noise, but with a calm authority that made people listen, made people pause. And then there was her sister, Elena, a woman of 45, someone who seemed to exist in a space just out of reach, with elegance that wasn't showy but quietly undeniable. I remember walking into her home for a small family gathering, sunlight spilling through the tall windows, casting warm patterns across the polished wooden floor. There was a faint scent of freshly baked pastries lingering in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Laughter trickled in from the living room, soft and easy, like the background of a memory I hadn't lived yet. Elena was in the kitchen when I arrived, arranging delicate plates on the counter. Her hair, streaked with subtle silver strands, fell in waves just past her shoulders. Her movements were measured and graceful, the kind that makes even mundane tasks look purposeful. When she glanced up, our eyes met, and I felt a quiet jolt, like stepping onto a floorboard that hadn't been nailed down properly. She smiled, a brief curve of her lips, and for a second, the room felt smaller, warmer, as if the sun had shifted closer. As the day went on, I noticed little things. The way her fingers lingered on the edge of a plate I handed her. The brush of her hand when she reached past me for a glass. The soft laugh she let out when she caught me fumbling over some trivial comment. Each gesture was fleeting, almost insignificant, yet they left an imprint, a lingering awareness in my chest. I caught myself stealing glances at her when I thought no one was looking, wondering why her presence made me simultaneously calm and restless. It wasn't just physical attraction, though yes, she was beautiful in a way that demanded subtle acknowledgement. It was the quiet confidence in her voice, the warmth that hovered behind her eyes, the vulnerability that peeked through only when she thought no one was paying attention. There was something about her that felt like a story waiting to be told, a melody you could hear if you stopped long enough to listen. By the end of the afternoon, I realized that the simple act of being near her had shifted something inside me. There was no drama, no overt flirting, just the slow, undeniable pull of curiosity, fascination, and the unspoken tension of proximity. I didn't understand it yet, and I wasn't supposed to. For now, all that mattered was noticing, feeling, observing, and, without admitting it to myself, wondering how a casual encounter could begin to unravel everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and desire. The day closed with a quiet sense of anticipation. Elena's presence lingered in the corners of my mind, like the soft echo of a song I couldn't yet name. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the first flicker of something I wasn't ready to define. A dangerous, beautiful curiosity that would only grow stronger with time. After that first quiet, curious day, something shifted. I found myself noticing Elena in ways I hadn't before. It wasn't about overt attraction, at least not entirely. It was how her presence seemed to pull at the edges of my thoughts. How a simple glance from her could feel like a gentle tug at my chest, leaving me momentarily unsteady. We were gathered again, this time in the living room. The afternoon light poured through the tall windows, casting a honeyed glow across the soft carpet. Sarah was across the room, talking with a friend, leaving Elena and me near the small, cluttered bookshelf in the corner. She was rearranging a few titles, her fingers brushing the spines with deliberate care. I moved closer, trying not to stare, but our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, I felt an odd electricity. She didn't smile outright, not yet, but there was something in the curve of her lips, a flicker of amusement that made my stomach tighten. I tried to focus on the conversation, on the mundane chatter about books and weather, but my mind kept drifting. Her hand accidentally brushed mine when passing a notebook, and I felt that quiet jolt again. The warmth, the softness of her skin, the subtle pressure of that brief contact. I immediately pulled my hand back, almost embarrassed at the reaction, but she didn't comment. Instead, she gave a knowing look, one that lingered just long enough to make me aware of my own awareness. It was in these small moments that the tension began to grow. Every casual touch, every prolonged glance, every unintentional brush seemed to carry an undercurrent of something more. And yet I felt guilty, loyal to Sarah, aware of the boundaries that existed. My heart raced at the thought of crossing them, but the pull of curiosity was stronger than reason. We moved to play a casual board game later that evening. Sitting on opposite sides of the table, I noticed how Elena's posture subtly leaned toward me when explaining her move, how her leg brushed mine under the table, lightly, almost innocently. Her voice carried warmth that made my chest ache, and the way she looked at me, patient, teasing, knowing, left me caught between fascination and restraint. I could feel the tension building inside me, a mixture of guilt and desire, awareness and confusion. I kept reminding myself, this was her sister, my girlfriend. A line existed, and I couldn't cross it. And yet, each small interaction was like a spark, flickering quietly, making me aware of my own conflicted feelings. By the time the evening ended, I was exhausted, not physically but emotionally. Every glance, every touch, every small exchange with Elena had left me raw, alive, and painfully aware of the slow, steady pull growing between us. I realized that this wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a quiet storm building beneath the surface. And as I left that night, her eyes lingered on mine one last time, and I knew, without saying a word, that neither of us could ignore it forever. That night, the house was quiet. Most of the family had left, the laughter and chatter replaced by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. I found myself lingering in the backyard, trying to clear my head, replaying the subtle tension from the day. The cool evening air brushed against my skin, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. Stars dotted the sky like scattered diamonds, and for a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, thinking the moment was solely mine. And then she appeared. Elena. She stepped into the backyard almost silently, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the porch light. She wore a simple sweater that brushed her hips, and her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands falling over her cheek. My heart gave an involuntary jolt. Even in this casual, late-evening setting, she carried that quiet elegance that seemed to command attention without effort. "Beautiful night," she said softly, stepping closer. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a warmth that made the air between us feel smaller, more intimate. I nodded, fumbling slightly with my hands, suddenly aware of the quiet tension building in my chest. She leaned casually against the railing, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. The faint scent of her shampoo reached me, and I had to remind myself to breathe normally. There was a long pause, a gentle silence that seemed to stretch indefinitely. And then she spoke again, her words slipping out with a teasing, almost daring softness. "Why should she have you all to herself?" The words hung in the air, light yet heavy, playful yet serious. My throat tightened, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, brush it away as impossible, inappropriate. Another part of me, a deeper, more vulnerable part, felt the undeniable pull of curiosity, the quiet stirrings of something I hadn't allowed myself to name. Her hand brushed mine lightly as she adjusted her stance, and the contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt of warmth up my arm. The way her eyes held mine, calm, confident, slightly mischievous, made me painfully aware of my own conflicted feelings. It wasn't just attraction. It was a magnetic, inexplicable draw, a sense of understanding and connection that I hadn't expected. I tried to ground myself, looking at the stars, feeling the cool breeze, focusing on the night sounds around us. Yet even then, the subtle brush of her presence lingered, each heartbeat echoing the tension that had been building for days. I knew this was dangerous territory, emotional, moral, and social lines blurred. Yet I couldn't deny the quiet thrill that came with being near her, the intoxicating awareness of shared space and unspoken possibilities. We stood there for a while longer, words unspoken but heavy, until she finally stepped back with a small, knowing smile, leaving me with the electric mix of confusion, longing, and an unshakable sense that nothing between us would ever be the same. That brief encounter in the soft glow of the backyard had changed everything. Subtly, irreversibly, and beautifully, igniting the slow burn that neither of us could ignore. The days after that backyard encounter were charged with a quiet electricity. Every interaction with Elena became a careful dance. Small gestures, fleeting touches, and unspoken glances carrying more weight than words ever could. I couldn't help but notice the subtle ways she sought proximity. Leaning in slightly when she spoke, brushing a stray hair behind her ear, or letting her hand linger near mine for just a fraction longer than necessary. One afternoon, we were in the kitchen together, making tea. The sun poured through the window, dust motes drifting lazily in the light. I handed her a mug, and our fingers touched. Nothing overt, just the briefest press of skin to skin. But it was enough to send warmth curling through me, a silent reminder that the tension between us was still very much alive. She gave me a small, knowing smile, one that made my chest tighten, and I found myself lingering in that small, suspended moment, unwilling to pull away too quickly. Later, we went on a walk to the nearby park. It was chilly enough that she wrapped a scarf around her neck, and I found myself adjusting it for her, my fingers brushing the soft fabric and grazing her shoulder in the process. She looked up at me, eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite name. Amusement, curiosity, desire, and my heart thudded painfully in my chest. We walked in silence for a while, the crunch of leaves underfoot mixing with the occasional distant laughter of children. Each step, each shared space felt loaded, heavy with unspoken understanding. It wasn't just the physical proximity that made these moments electric. It was the quiet intimacy of conversation. Elena shared small, personal details, memories of her youth, moments of vulnerability she seldom showed to anyone else. I listened, captivated, feeling a deepening connection that went beyond attraction. When I offered a reassuring comment or a shared laugh, our touches became more natural. A gentle brush of hands when pointing something out, leaning slightly closer when explaining a thought, the warmth of our knees occasionally brushing under a bench. And yet, I was painfully aware of the line I shouldn't cross. Sarah was my girlfriend, and every interaction with her sister carried the weight of guilt, curiosity, and a slow-burning longing that I couldn't easily suppress. It was a constant internal tug-of-war. Part of me wanted to maintain composure, respect boundaries, and walk away from the edge. Another part, a quieter, more persistent part, wanted to lean in, linger, explore the magnetism between us. By the time we returned home, I was emotionally spent. Every glance, every casual touch, every shared laugh had left a lingering warmth in my chest, a quiet ache that made it impossible to ignore the growing tension. I knew that this slow burn wasn't going to dissipate. It was intensifying with every passing moment, weaving itself into our interactions, embedding into the spaces we shared, and planting seeds of desire and curiosity that neither of us could fully control. As I lay awake that night, replaying the day in fragments, her smile, the way her scarf brushed against my hand, the subtle tilt of her head as she laughed, I realized that the emotional pull between us was no longer a fleeting distraction. It was becoming a quiet force, one that demanded attention, understanding, and, inevitably, confrontation. The slow burn had begun in earnest, and I knew the days ahead would be charged with impossible temptation and fragile, tantalizing intimacy. The tension between Elena and me had grown unbearable, simmering beneath every glance, every touch, every casual conversation. It was a quiet, persistent ache, a slow-burning fire that I could neither ignore nor fully understand. That evening, I found myself alone with her again, this time in the living room after dinner. The others had retreated to their rooms, leaving us in the soft glow of the lamp, the shadows dancing gently across the walls. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her posture relaxed but deliberate, as if she knew exactly how close to the edge she could sit without falling. I took a seat across from her, careful to maintain distance, but the moment felt charged. Every small sound, the rustle of her sweater, the soft inhale before she spoke, the subtle brush of her fingers against the couch, amplified my awareness of her presence. "I don't think I've ever told anyone this," she began, her voice soft, carrying a vulnerability that made me lean in without realizing it. "Not really. People see me as confident, as in control. But sometimes I feel invisible, like no one sees what's underneath." Her eyes met mine, searching, waiting, and I felt the weight of honesty pressing into the space between us. I wanted to respond, to comfort her, to bridge the invisible distance that had grown between us. But I was also painfully aware of the line I wasn't supposed to cross. My chest tightened, my heart hammering, as I realized how deeply drawn I was to her vulnerability, how much I wanted to be the one to see her fully. Without thinking, my hand moved, gently resting on the armrest near hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand hover close, almost touching mine, and the electricity in that small space was palpable. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the soft tremor in her voice when she laughed nervously at her own confession. Every instinct in me screamed to lean closer, to feel the brush of her hand against mine, to close the gap between us entirely. But restraint held me back. For a long time, we sat in that fragile silence, words unspoken but heavy, every glance a confession, every pause a declaration of desire. I could see her fighting the same struggle I was, wanting closeness, yearning for touch, yet knowing the consequences of stepping too far. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and unbearably intimate. Finally, she leaned back slightly, letting out a quiet sigh, her fingers brushing against mine ever so lightly. That small contact, so fleeting yet deliberate, was enough to leave my chest burning, my mind spinning with what-ifs, and my heart torn between loyalty and longing. I realized, in that moment, that nothing between us would ever be simple. The emotional pull had reached its peak, the slow burn threatening to ignite fully, yet tempered by awareness and restraint. As I left her room that night, the memory of her eyes, her voice, the warmth of her presence, and the near touch of our hands stayed with me, embedding itself deep in my thoughts. The attraction, the tension, the unspoken desire. It was no longer something that could be ignored. It had become the defining force of my heart, forcing me to confront truths I wasn't ready to name, and preparing me for the moments of honest emotion that would soon follow. The tension that had been building for days finally reached a moment of quiet clarity. It wasn't dramatic or explosive. It didn't need to be. The truth between Elena and me was subtle, a fragile thread stretched taut by longing, curiosity, and the slow burn of unspoken feelings. That evening, the house was hushed. The others were away for the night, leaving only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards to fill the space. I found her in the living room, seated on the edge of the sofa with her knees drawn slightly toward her chest. She looked at me when I entered, her eyes calm but probing, searching for something she couldn't yet name. I closed the door gently behind me, the click sounding louder than expected in the stillness, and took a seat across from her. There was a long pause, weighted with all the things we had left unsaid. "I can't stop thinking about you," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. Not a declaration, not a demand, just honesty. She reached for my hand, the warmth of her fingers brushing mine, grounding me in the moment. Not in a reckless way. I just feel something I haven't felt before. Her words hit me with the subtle force of truth. I swallowed hard, my chest tight, my mind spinning with the conflict I had been carrying for days. I wanted to reassure her, to speak freely, to tell her that I felt it too, but restraint had been my constant companion. And yet, here we were, two people leaning into a fragile honesty, sharing the vulnerability we had both been hiding. "I feel it too," I admitted quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how or why. I know there are lines we can't cross, but I can't deny this connection. It's there, and it's real." The subtle brush of her hand against mine became deliberate, our fingers intertwining just slightly. The warmth of her palm seeped into mine, a gentle, grounding sensation that made the quiet room feel intimate, almost suspended in time. Her gaze softened, and she leaned just a fraction closer, the faint scent of her shampoo brushing against my face. I felt the steady rise and fall of her chest, the warmth radiating from her body, and the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat as if it were echoing my own. For the first time, the pull between us didn't feel dangerous. It felt honest, shared, and human. We talked then openly about boundaries, about loyalty, and about the complexity of emotions that didn't fit neatly into words. There were pauses, small smiles, moments of laughter tinged with nervousness, and the gentle brush of shoulders as we leaned in to emphasize a point. It was quiet intimacy, the kind that builds trust, understanding, and a connection far deeper than mere attraction. By the end of the conversation, the tension that had been coiled inside me for days had softened, replaced by warmth, clarity, and mutual understanding. We were closer now, emotionally, intimately, without overstepping. Her cheek brushed lightly against my chest as she gave a tentative hug, and I held her shoulders, feeling the comfort, the steadiness, and the quiet assurance of our shared honesty. That night, I realized something profound. Desire need not be reckless to be real, and love could exist in complex, unexpected forms, quietly, subtly, beautifully. The slow burn had not only illuminated what we felt, but had taught us patience, restraint, and the delicate art of being together without crossing the lines that mattered most. The weekend morning felt like a gentle exhale after days of tension, longing, and careful navigation of feelings. Sunlight filtered softly through the kitchen windows, casting golden streaks across the countertops and bouncing off the porcelain mugs lined neatly on the shelves. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the faint, buttery scent of toast, and somewhere nearby, the soft hum of a kettle added a quiet rhythm to the room. It was ordinary, domestic, and yet it held an intimacy that felt rare and precious. Sarah was already at the table, chatting casually about her workweek, unaware of the quiet shift that had been happening between her sister and me. Elena moved around the kitchen with ease, pouring coffee and spreading butter on toast, her movements deliberate yet natural, each small action carrying a subtle warmth. When our eyes met across the room, there was a spark, brief, playful, and entirely unspoken, that reminded me of the slow-burning connection that had grown between us. I joined them at the table, and the conversation flowed easily, full of laughter and quiet familiarity. My hand brushed against Elena's accidentally, lightly, as I reached for the sugar, and she responded with a small, knowing smile. There was no guilt, no hesitation, just a natural closeness that had grown from honesty and restraint, from acknowledging feelings without letting them overtake our reality. Throughout breakfast, small gestures conveyed everything words couldn't. Sarah rested a hand lightly on my shoulder as she reached for her cup. Elena's hand lingered near mine, fingertips almost touching as she passed the toast. We all shared glances and quiet smiles, an unspoken understanding threading through our interactions. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense between all three of us, but it was deeply intimate, a balance of affection, care, and acknowledgement of shared emotions. After breakfast, we moved to the living room, lingering in the warmth of the sun streaming through the windows. Elena leaned against the sofa, shoulders brushing mine as we talked about small, everyday things. The trivialities of life that, when shared with someone who understands you, feel comforting and meaningful. Her voice carried the soft undertones of vulnerability and confidence, and I found myself savoring each word, each pause, each subtle laugh. It was then that I realized the beauty of what had grown between us. Desire and attraction had once been tangled in guilt and tension, but now, honesty and restraint had transformed that energy into something warm, safe, and deeply satisfying. We could share space, touch lightly, look at each other with quiet affection, and exist together without chaos, without compromise, without breaking anyone's trust. Elena brushed a stray hair behind my ear, her fingertips lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. I offered a small, reassuring squeeze of her shoulder. Sarah looked on, smiling softly, completely comfortable in this new rhythm we had found. There was laughter, lingering glances, and subtle touches. Nothing overt, yet everything felt deeply intimate. As I sat there, surrounded by the warmth of the sun, the aroma of breakfast, and the gentle hum of conversation, I realized that the slow burn had reached its conclusion. Not with explosive passion, but with understanding, connection, and quiet fulfillment. Every heartbeat, every glance, every careful touch had led to this moment of calm intimacy. And in that ordinary, golden morning, I understood that love could be complex, patient, and beautiful. A slow, steady flame that illuminated the heart without ever burning recklessly. Sparkles, if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more slow burn, age gap romance tales that tug at the heart. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever felt a connection that was impossible to ignore?